Who told you that you were allowed to walk in here looking like that?" The words landed low, stripped of the controlled boardroom authority that Ines Dalton had spent 4 years memorizing like a second language. They weren't a compliment. They weren't even a question, not really. They were something older and more dangerous than either, and the second they left Zane Varela's mouth, everything Ines had worked so carefully to become, invisible, efficient, entirely unremarkable, crumbled like paper in a closed fist. She had spent 4 years mastering the art of disappearing inside the Varela Group's private medical facility on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower. As head nurse, Ines wore the same charcoal scrubs every day. She kept her dark hair pinned back in a knot so tight it pulled at her temples by afternoon. She wore no jewelry except a small silver watch she'd inherited from her grandmother, and she spoke in the measured, unhurried cadence of someone who had trained herself not to take up too much space in any room. She was excellent at her job. The doctors who rotated through the facility said so openly. The security personnel who came to her after injuries said so with gratitude they clearly weren't comfortable feeling, and Zane Varela himself had referenced her competence exactly twice in 4 years. Once in passing, once in a quarterly review summary she'd received through 3 layers of administrative staff. He did not see her. That had always been the arrangement. That was the entire point. Zane Varela was not a man who dealt in the invisible. He was 38 years old and had built the Varela Group from a regional defense contracting firm into a multinational empire with government clearances in 6 countries. He was tall, deliberate, and possessed the kind of physical authority that didn't require volume. Men with twice his resources crossed rooms to greet him first. The legitimate arm of his business was impeccable. The rest of it, the shipping corridors and the document networks, and the untraceable offshore acts that Ines had learned to politely ignore, was simply the architecture of how real power operated. She understood that now. She'd had 4 years to understand it. To Ines, Zane had been a name on an org chart and an occasional silhouette through the glass wall of the executive suite when she delivered post-procedure reports. A voice she heard sometimes on calls that ended when she entered the room. A presence she had taught herself to treat like weather. Massive, unchangeable, something you planned around. Then his executive assistant called her on a Thursday morning with 16 hours' notice. "Mr. Varela requires your attendance at the Pemberton Foundation Gala tomorrow evening aboard the Solaris," the assistant said. "Monaco. You'll fly out at 6 a.m. The event is black tie. Use the company account for appropriate attire." Ines had been reading a patient chart. She set it down very carefully. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Mr. Varela is aware of your position. Is there a medical concern I should prepare for?" "There is not." A brief pause. His previous companion for the evening is no longer available. The guest list includes 2 of Varela Group's largest defense ministry clients and a representative from an Eastern European shipping consortium whose name I'm not authorized to provide over this line. Mr. Varela needs someone who understands discretion, won't require explanations, and can manage herself in a room full of people who are all pretending to be something they're not. Another pause. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Get me Dalton." She hadn't argued. Arguing with Zane Varela's office was approximately as productive as arguing with the tide. What she hadn't anticipated was the dress. She'd found it in a boutique off the Rue de la Paix, 2 hours before her scheduled arrival at the Solaris. The shop was small and expensive, and the saleswoman had looked at Ines's carry-on bag with a skepticism Ines chose not to acknowledge. The racks were full of gowns designed to be maximized, plunging backs, architectural cutouts, necklines that began around the solar plexus. They were beautiful. They were also costumes for a version of femininity Ines had never inhabited. Then she found it on an end rack, almost bypassed entirely. Burgundy silk, the deep rich color of a glass of Merlot held up to candlelight. It was fitted through the bodice and hips, off-shoulder, with a subtle bias cut that made it move like water. In the dressing room, when Ines pulled her hair free from its pins for the first time since she couldn't remember when. The saleswoman's suggestion practically insisted upon. She stared at herself in the 3-panel mirror for a long, quiet moment. 4 years of deliberate invisibility looked back at her, and she barely recognized the person in the reflection who had made that choice. She bought the dress. She did something about her hair. She arrived at the private gangway of the Solaris at exactly the time she'd been told to. Zane was standing at the far end of the ship's main salon, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that gave out onto the glittering harbor. He was in a charcoal tuxedo with a black shirt and no tie, which should have looked less formal, but instead looked like a man who had decided formality was something other people required. He held a glass of scotch in one hand. His phone was pressed to his ear with the other. "Tell Rykov the terms don't change. If he wants the clearance timeline revised, he files through Brussels, same as everyone else." He turned away from the window, still talking, and stopped. The phone lowered. The sentence he'd been building simply ceased to exist. Zane Varela's eyes traveled over her with the slow, focused attention of someone reading a document they hadn't expected to find. The burgundy silk. The dark hair loose around her shoulders, the waves the stylist had added, that morning catching the low chandelier light of the salon. The way 4 years of 12-hour nursing shifts had built a body underneath those charcoal scrubs that the scrubs had never once suggested. He ended the call. He set the glass down on the credenza behind him without looking at it. Then he crossed the room. His movements were deliberate in the way that everything about him was deliberate. Unhurried, precise, the walk of a man who understood that the room would wait. He stopped in front of her with less than 2 feet of air between them. Up close, she could smell the cedar and amber of whatever he wore, and underneath it something cooler and harder that she had no name for. His eyes were grey, almost silver under the chandelier light, and there was nothing indifferent in them. "Who told you that you were allowed to walk in here looking like that?" he said. Ines kept her chin level. 4 years of managing trauma bays had given her a very high threshold for situations designed to destabilize. "You said appropriate attire," she replied. "I used the company card." A muscle moved in his jaw. His gaze dropped briefly, entirely without apology, to the neckline of the burgundy dress, then back up. 4 years, he said very quietly, like he was doing arithmetic he hadn't expected to need. "You've been 42 floors below me for 4 years. 42 floors and a significant pay grade," Ines said, because her mouth occasionally made decisions her instinct for self-preservation objected to. Something in his expression shifted. Not a smile exactly. Something more controlled than a smile, and considerably more alarming. "Stay next to me tonight," he said, straightening slightly, the executive composure resettling like a coat he'd briefly set aside. "Don't volunteer information. Don't leave my side unless I tell you. And if Viktor Serov speaks directly to you, you look at me first." "Who is Viktor Serov?" "Someone who is very good at reading people," Zane said, "and who has been trying to find my weaknesses for the better part of 2 years. He offered her his arm. She took it. They went to feed the wolves together. The Solaris's aft deck had been transformed for the Gala into something that looked like a film set for a movie about extraordinary power. Tiered flower arrangements in cream and ivory, a string quartet playing somewhere. Ines couldn't see. Uniformed staff, moving between clusters of guests who were all, as Zane's assistant had predicted, performing expertly at being something other than what they were. The Monaco harbor gleamed beyond the railings. The night air was warm and smelled of salt and money. Zane's hand found the small of her back the moment they stepped onto the deck. It was not tentative. It was the placement of a man establishing a perimeter, and Ines was acutely aware of it the way you were aware of a hand pressed flat against a wound, necessary, focused, impossible to ignore. "That's Minister Holt's chief of staff," she heard him say quietly near her ear as they passed a cluster of men near the bar. "He's received 2 separate Varela Group contracts in the last 18 months. Don't mention it." I wasn't going to. I know, I'm thinking out loud. A pause. You're better at this than most people I bring to these things. You've never brought me to one of these things. Exactly, he said, and she felt the word more than she heard it. She survived the first hour on instinct and the slow sip of a glass of Sancerre that someone pressed into her hand. She watched Zane operate a room with the clinical efficiency she had spent 4 years observing from 42 floors below and finding professionally impressive without entirely understanding. She understood it now. He remembered names and used them. He gave people his full attention for precisely the length of time required to make them feel seen and then moved on. He was never rude. He was never warm. He was the human equivalent of a weather system. You didn't try to engage with it, you adjusted to it, or you got wet. And every time a man's eyes stayed on Ines for a beat too long, which happened more than she was prepared for, and significantly more than she'd experienced in any of the previous 4 years, Zane shifted almost imperceptibly. Just a degree. Just enough to put himself between her and whoever was looking, without a word, without acknowledgement, like it was a reflex too old to explain. She was trying to decide what to do with that information when she heard the voice. Zane. It came from behind them, and it was the kind of voice that carried without volume, smooth and accented, mid-European, with an undertone of amusement that didn't reach the eyes. You finally replaced the socialite. Good. She had no idea what room she was in. Zane's hand tightened at her back. They turned together. Viktor Serov was shorter than she'd expected. 60 perhaps, with silver hair brushed back from a wide forehead and the compact, deliberate build of someone who had once been dangerous with his body and was now dangerous with other things. He was wearing a white dinner jacket that was either a provocation or a joke. 2 men flanked him at a distance that was close enough to be intentional. Viktor, Zane said, not a greeting, a classification. Who is this? Serov's gaze moved to Ines with the unhurried thoroughness of a man accustomed to performing inventory. Not sexual, something colder than sexual. Analytical. I don't believe we've been introduced. She's with me, Zane said. That's sufficient. With you. Serov smiled. It was a technically accurate smile. Your nurse, isn't she? Ines Dalton, head of clinical services at the Meridian Tower facility. He tilted his head slightly, as if he found her interesting in a way she was not going to enjoy. Remarkable woman, very good at staying in her lane, her brother's much more of a conversationalist. The deck seemed to tilt. Not physically, but Ines felt it, the floor dropping 6 inches beneath her, and she understood exactly what was coming the way she understood cardiac rhythms on a monitor. The pattern before the crash. Ask her about Regan, Serov said pleasantly, eyes moving to Zane. Ask her why she took the position at your facility 4 years ago specifically. Ask her what Regan Dalton owed my organization before she walked through your front door with her impeccable references and her very unremarkable shoes. He spread his hands in a small theatrical gesture. Or don't. You'll find out either way. I've already had people pull the records. The silence that settled between the 3 of them was the specific silence of a room where everyone has just heard a gun cock. Zane didn't look at her immediately. He looked at Serov. His expression didn't change at all, which was in some ways worse than if it had. We'll finish this conversation later, he said to Serov, with the tone of a man rescheduling an unpleasant appointment, somewhere without witnesses. Serov nodded, still smiling. Of course, I'll be here all evening. Zane turned Ines by the arm, not rough, but not gentle, and walked her through the crowd to a narrow service corridor that ran along the ship's interior, lined with equipment lockers and the low hum of ventilation systems. He let go of her arm, he faced her. The grey eyes were not the eyes of the executive she'd spent 4 years carefully orbiting. They were the eyes of whatever was underneath that, and whatever was underneath it was very quiet, and very still in the way that things were quiet, and still before they moved quickly. Tell me, he said. And she did. 4 years ago, Regan had called her at 2 in the morning from a number she didn't recognize. He was crying, which was how she knew it was serious. Her younger brother didn't cry. He told her he'd been laundering money through Viktor Serov's network, that it had gone sideways, that he owed them amounts she couldn't process hearing on the phone in the dark of her apartment. He told her Serov had given him an option. Get someone inside the Varela Group's medical facility. Someone trusted, someone with access to internal transport schedules, someone who could pass medical clearances without raising flags. Get someone in there and feed them information on the medical courier system Varela used to move certain documents across borders. Get his sister. She'd taken the job in terror. She'd taken it because Regan had begged her, and because the alternative Serov had outlined was not an alternative at all. And then she had walked into the Meridian Tower and seen, exactly in the first 90 days, exactly how the facility operated, exactly what Zane Varela had built, exactly how many people's safety and livelihoods were threaded through the structures she was being asked to hollow out. She hadn't passed a single piece of useful information to Serov's people in 4 years. She'd stalled, she'd sent them outdated logs, revised routing tables, false medication inventories. She'd built a very careful fiction and maintained it while living inside a real job she had come to genuinely care about, working for a man she had no business caring about at all, keeping her brother alive with smoke and mirrors and the constant low-grade terror of the clock running out. He threatened Regan. Ines finished. Her voice was steady. She'd learned to deliver bad news steadily. Every time Serov's people pushed, I told them the system was changing, that I needed more time. I never gave them anything real. Not once. She looked at Zane directly. You can pull every report I filed, every log I touched. There's nothing in it that helps Serov because I made sure of it. The silence in the corridor was narrow and close. Why? Zane said. It was such a simple question. She'd prepared for anger, for immediate action, for the cold executive processing of a security breach. She hadn't prepared for that single genuine word. Because I know what you built, Ines said, and this was the part she hadn't practiced, the part that lived below all the careful professional distance she'd constructed. I know the people in that facility. I know which security personnel come to me at 4 a.m. with injuries they don't want on record, and I know what it means that they trust someone enough to show up at all. I know how many people's lives run through your organization, and I know what happens to all of them if Serov gets what he wants. She stopped. She let it be simple. I didn't want that to happen. To any of them. To you. Zane was very still. To me, he repeated, the words flat and careful, like he was handling something that might be fragile. She didn't look away from him. If she was going to tell the truth, she was going to do it without apology. To you. He moved so fast she didn't have time to prepare for it. His hands came up to her face and he kissed her like someone who had run out of the vocabulary for what they were trying to say and had chosen this instead. It was not careful. It was not gentle. It was 4 years of distance collapsing all at once, tasting of good scotch and the adrenaline still sharp in both their bloodstreams, and Ines gripped the lapels of his tuxedo jacket because the floor was doing that tilting thing again and she needed something fixed. When he pulled back, they were both breathing unevenly. His forehead rested against hers. His hands were still framing her face. Regan, he said, his voice rough. He's in the city, Ines said. Serov's people have him somewhere, or they're using him. I don't know which. We're going to find out. He reached into his jacket and produced an encrypted phone. Navarre, he said when the call connected. Serov brought his full team to the Gala, which means his base here is running light. I want Regan Dalton located within the hour. Last known association with Serov's Monaco network. Pull the thread. He paused. All of it. Code 7. He ended the call and straightened. The boardroom composure was back, but there was something different underneath it now, like a room where all the furniture had shifted 2 inches and nothing was where you'd reached for it before. Stay on the boat, he said. I'll have Nava's team take us off when they have something. She nodded. They went back out to the deck and she spent the next hour watching Zane Varela be professionally present in a room full of people who had no idea anything had just happened, and she thought, this is what he is. This is what I've been 42 floors away from for 4 years. The extraction team located Regan in 40 minutes. A safe house above a restaurant in the 4th arrondissement, Serov's standard accommodation for useful assets, according to Navarre's report, which Zane relayed to Ines in the car in a tone entirely devoid of editorial judgment. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and felt the cold begin to spread through her chest as the city lights moved past the window. The safe house was quiet when Navarre's team went through the door. The footage came through on Zane's phone, which he tilted so Ines could see the screen. Her brother was not chained to a chair. He was not blindfolded, not injured, not afraid. He was sitting behind a wide mahogany desk in a room that looked nothing like a prison, in a very good suit she'd never seen him wear, with a glass of wine and an open laptop. When Navarre's team came through the door, he stood up fast and reached for something in the desk drawer. One of Navarre's men had his wrist before the drawer was halfway open. Ines watched her brother's face on a 4-inch screen in the back of an armored car in Monaco, and she understood the way you understood things you had already known without knowing you knew them. That he had not been afraid of Serov for 4 years. He had been comfortable. 20 minutes later, they brought him to a secure room at a property Varela Group maintained outside the city. Navarre's people left them alone. Regan looked at his sister across a plain metal table, and his expression moved through surprise and calculation before it arrived at something that Ines recognized, with a grief that surprised her with its physical weight, as contempt. "You brought Varela's team down on this," he said. Not a question. "You told me they were going to kill you," Ines said quietly. He shrugged. The ease of it was extraordinary. "I told you what you needed to hear to get you through the door. You had a clean record, you were good, and Serov needed someone the Varela Group wouldn't look twice at." He leaned back slightly. "Turns out you were too good, actually. You didn't deliver anything useful for 4 years. Serov's been losing patience. I've been managing that. Managing it." She turned the phrase over in her mind. 4 years of terror. 4 years of stalling and lying and maintaining a fiction at the cost of everything she might have been inside the Varela Group if she'd walked in through a clean door. 4 years of Regan in a good suit with a glass of wine. "You could have told me," she said. "You wouldn't have done it." "No," she agreed, "I wouldn't have." He studied her. "So what happens now? You let Varela decide?" She stood up. Zane was waiting in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she couldn't read yet, though she suspected she was going to have time to learn. "Don't touch him," she said. He tilted his head very slightly. "Not because he deserves mercy," Ines said. "Because he doesn't deserve the speed of it." She thought of the things she'd given up to keep Regan safe. The colleagues she hadn't let herself get close to, the professional reputation she'd held at arm's length, the 4 years of careful smallness. Pull every account he touches for Serov, financial records, communication logs, every network he's been managing. Hand it to your legal team and use it however you need to, then let him go. No money, no contacts, no protection. She said it with the same flat calm she used for bad prognosis. He can spend the rest of his life wondering if you're done with him. Zane looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened off the wall and called Navarre back. When it was done, the accounts frozen, the records transferred, Regan walked to a street corner in the 4th arrondissement with nothing but the clothes he'd borrowed from Serov's wardrobe. Ines stood on the terrace of the Varela property and watched the last of the Monaco lights reflect off the harbour and tried to measure the weight of what 4 years felt like when you finally set them down. She heard Zane come out behind her. He stopped a foot away, not touching, looking at the same water. "The job offer stands," he said. "What job?" "The one I should have offered you 4 years ago if I'd had the sense to actually look at the person running my medical facility." He paused. Head of Operational Security, Clinical and Logistical. You know the transport systems better than anyone on my team, and you've just demonstrated you can hold a lie together under pressure for 4 years without breaking. Another pause, shorter. That's a rarer skill than it sounds. I kept secrets from you for 4 years, Ines said. You kept Serov's secrets from Serov for 4 years, Zane said, on my behalf, while sitting 42 floors below me in clothes designed to make me forget you existed. He turned to look at her. In the harbour light, his face was unguarded in a way she didn't think he allowed it to be very often. I'm not going to forget you exist again, Ines. I'd like you to make that difficult for me if I try. She turned to face him. The burgundy silk moved with the warm night air coming off the water. I'm not your nurse anymore, she said. No, Zane said, you're not. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with efficiency and everything to do with choice. And she understood, finally, that there were some things even 4 years of careful invisibility couldn't undo. The woman who had walked into the Meridian Tower in charcoal scrubs and unremarkable shoes had survived everything thrown at her, the fear, the deception, the grief of a brother who had sold her out for a corner office in someone else's empire. She had survived it not by becoming smaller, but by becoming precisely as necessary as the situation required. Zane Varela had spent 4 years in the same building as someone formidable enough to outmaneuver a seasoned crime network alone, in silence for years. He was done being in the same building without knowing it. The Solaris goes back to Cannes tomorrow morning, he said. I'd like you on it. Ines looked out at the harbour one more time, at the lights and the water and the distance she was done maintaining. I'll need better shoes, she said. And for the first time in 4 years, Zane Varela laughed.